That was Jack Del Rio from last Wednesday. A press conference was previously scheduled as part of the ongoing organized team activities for the organization. And he was talking about a tweet that he had posted the day before. We wrote something about it. We got a personal mention from Jack Del Rio during that same press conference because it was the slow time and, we got nothing better to do. So we decided to write about what he said. But what he said caught my eye because he was setting up what I believe is a false equivalence, and many others believe it as well. Many others disagree. That's a point that we'll get to coming up. But the Commanders, after a couple of days of it percolating, and I think that there was a lot of strategic attention paid to the PR fallout, to the potential consequences, to the effort to get free money for a stadium in Virginia, when one of the Virginia state senators comes out and says, that was the last nail in the coffin for me when Jack Del Rio downplayed the insurrection from January 6th, calling it a dust-up. And you have other criticism. The Commanders made a decision, a business decision, that they could not let this stand, that they had to do something. And I thought it was curious that the fine was imposed by Ron Rivera, not by the team, not by ownership, not by anyone except Ron Rivera. I think he's the only one in that organization who has both the credibility and the moral authority to pull it off. The team itself doesn't have currently the moral authority to pull it off. That Rivera was the one who was assigned the task of imposing the fine, even though clearly it's not a coach decision, it's an organization decision, and it's a business decision. They decided early on not to say anything, to monitor it. Ron Rivera tried during that same round of press conferences to downplay it, and it wasn't until Del Rio decided to talk about it and called it a dust-up that it really became a big deal, and so they felt like they had to do something. I said this yesterday, Miles, and I'm happy to discuss it and talk it through. I think that to the extent that somebody says something, you have a right to say something. First Amendment does not give you freedom from consequences. Whether those consequences are other people saying what you said is stupid or your employer feeling compelled to do something about it. When you work in an industry that relies upon PR, relies upon people feeling good about your team, your product, it gets a little dicey when people start making business decisions based upon the exercise of First Amendment rights. That's what happened to Colin Kaepernick. Teams made what they thought were good business decisions, I thought were unfair and inappropriate business decisions. You could make the same argument that at the end of the day, Del Rio got what he should have gotten by a lot of people saying, are you freaking crazy? It was a dust-up. That should have been enough. That taking $100,000 out of his pocket is a little too close to what they did to Colin Kaepernick. You make a business decision because you're afraid there's going to be some negative consequence to not acting. For the NFL and its teams, the fear was if you associate with Colin Kaepernick, you're going to have a chunk of your fan base that doesn't show up for games, that doesn't support your product. And for Jack Del Rio, I think the fundamental fear was we're not going to get free money for our new stadium in Virginia unless the politicians there are sufficiently placated by the idea that we did something to smack this guy down for saying something as dumb as it may have been in the opinion of many. I know many agree with him, many disagree, and those people said so on both sides. And I hate to both sides an issue that I feel like in my heart shouldn't be, but this is where we are in this country. This is where we are right now. We both sides feel like it shouldn't be both sides, if that makes any sense. So I don't feel great about taking $100,000 out of his pocket. I think the public flack that he got was sufficient. Same thing with Colin Kaepernick. You got a certain chunk of the fan base that doesn't like what he did. He takes it. He stands firm in his belief, and he moves forward, and he has a chance to move forward, ideally, in the NFL. But we know that didn't happen. I don't know. There's just something about all this that just doesn't sit well with me. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just how moronic what Jack Del Rio said was. I mean, take the whole Black Lives Matter, racist undertones of what he had to say about just asking questions. Let's take that out of it for a second, right? Just to call what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, 2021, a dust-up is moronic. It's ludicrous. Right, and we're having a primetime special of congressional hearings where an officer is talking about how she was slipping in other people's blood, right? People literally died from the January 6th insurrection. So to call that a dust up as the defensive coordinator of the team that represents Washington, D.C., that doesn't make any sense. So I liked that Ron Rivera's statement was so strong in that, you know, he's saying that, look, I'm not going to stand for this false equivalence here, right? Of, you know, people talking or people standing up because they're not being heard about systemic injustice in the criminal justice system, right? Systemic racism that way. And also, like, look, we have an attempted coup on the other side of the equation here. Like that's a false equivalence. But yeah, when you're talking about then fining him and then using that fine to go to law enforcement, it's all like, what kind of are we doing here? I thought the statement to me was stronger than the fine. And then you see Jack Del Rio deletes his Twitter account, which we probably would all be better off if we were off Twitter. But like,
Yes.
yeah, I think that that's something that he needed to do, because this whole thing of him just asking questions about, you know, the January 6th committee hearings, this is not something that he just started a week ago. I mean, we could go back and look at Jack Del Rio's now deleted Twitter history. He's been saying this kinds of stuff on Twitter for a long, long, long time. So
yes,
it's a long time coming for him to delete this and stop being a distraction.
Taking the pages, the various pages out of the same playbook that reflects the mindset that puts him on that side of where we currently are in America, where we are in two tribes, we are in two camps, and we view everything in the most simple, absolute terms. I'm not saying you and I'm saying we as a people.
Yeah.
The danger is the moment that there's a development, we immediately run it through our side. How do we react to it based upon what our views are, what our tribe would say to this, without regard to nuance or subtlety? And so that just makes the divide even stronger. I wrote something yesterday, and I was stunned by the amount of positive feedback that I got for it. I was concerned it was going to be a lot of negative feedback, like I got over the weekend for some of the other things that I said about this. But the reality is, we are jammed into these two camps by a two-party political system when I think most of us would like to reside somewhere in the purple, not red or blue, not deep red or deep blue, but somewhere in between is where we are. I never liked the idea of you join a political party, so you must make a blood oath to every single plank of the party's platform. I prefer my political views a la carte. There are certain things that I may be a little conservative about. There are certain things that I would be progressive about. There are certain things that I am flat out libertarian about. So I don't like the idea of saying I have to pick one or the other. But that's kind of what we've become, where it's one or the other, and you're required to have your membership respected in whichever tribe you're in to go out there and fight like hell on every issue and accept every issue as the most important thing you've ever dealt with and shout from the rooftops your tribe's position on it. And that's what Del Rio has been. He's been a card-carrying member of the red tribe, and we know it's predictable. Whether it's red or blue, we know what the reaction is going to be. We know when something needs to be downplayed, it will be. When an equivalence needs to be made, it will be. And the people in Team Blue think that the people in Team Red are being incredibly disingenuous and dishonest about how they process things, and the people in Team Red think the people in Team Blue are being incredibly dishonest and disingenuous about the way they protest things. And it's amazing to me that we really are, Miles, two countries living within the same borders. And that's kind of what we are right now. We're forced into those two tribes unless we have the willingness to say, wait a minute, why do I need to be in one of these two tribes? Why can't I just be my own person who has my own views, where I'm not beholden to this idea that I'm going to slip into this mindset where you're wrong and here's why, and the person you're trying to tell it to isn't going to listen to you because they're too busy saying you're wrong and here's why back to you.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, as we say, Mike. Let me say this. There's a reason why I live in Los Angeles County in Southern California, so that's part of it. what you said reminded me a lot of what Matthew McConaughey was saying last week when he was at the White House, and he was talking about the shooting that happened in Uvalde, Texas, and there should be principles that we should all be able to agree about, as Americans. And one of them is that we shouldn't have to worry about kids getting slaughtered in schools, right? So there seems to be some movement on that, over the weekend, and that's all well and good. We'll see what good it actually does. But I tend to agree with you that we shouldn't always just go one place or the other place, but sometimes that's difficult when the one place doesn't make it viable as a Black American to be in that place.
I agree.
So that's the way I see it. And that's why, like, stuff with Jack Del Rio, it burns me up, man, because it's like there's just so many undertones there when you're I'm just asking questions. I mean, why is it that there's two standards for blah blah blah? Like, I can't jive with that. Like, there's nothing for me over there. So,
and I agree with you. And that's why it's unfortunate that it feels like, because we're so rigidly in two camps, there's never room for nuance. Right. It all has to be absolute, especially the position that Jack Del Rio thought it was just a simple apples to apples. It's hardly apples to apples when you consider, as you said, for anybody who watched the Thursday night hearing, and they're having another one today at 10 a.m. Eastern, and I'm going to watch that. I think it's our duty as Americans to watch it. But see, that's the problem, Miles. You and I think it's our duty as Americans to watch this process and accept what this committee found. There are people out there who think it's all fraudulent, who think it's all fake, who think it's all political, who think it's not about getting to the truth, that they've already decided it wasn't an insurrection. They've already decided and accepted that this was no big deal. And if it was an insurrection, where were their weapons? Why didn't they bring guns? It's like, really? You think they're going to storm the Capitol with AR-15s, and you think they're not going to be mowed down? Or, as I said last week, and I wish I could remember the person who posted this. It was a comedian who has this bit that he puts up anytime that there's a mass shooting, and the issue of gun control becomes a front burner topic. Anybody who thinks they need an AR-15 to protect them from the government doesn't understand how tanks work. So it's not like they're going to launch a military assault on the Capitol. They did what they could. They used the cover of a mob to infiltrate with groups that were highly organized, groups that were strategically planning a pathway in at the behest of somebody high up in the government who wanted the process of transferring power to be delayed, if not derailed. That's not all that hard to understand if you're willing to be fair about accepting and processing the facts. And that's where there's a fundamental difference between organic protests that erupt because of horribly unfair, illegal, immoral treatment of minorities by police officers, and that frustration erupts into an organic riot. That's far different from somebody deliberately pressing buttons over a period of months to try to engineer a result that looks organic, but that is hardly something that just kind of happened on a Wednesday afternoon in January of 2021.
Yes, exactly. But and again, that's why I think it's so ridiculous that you would have a defensive coordinator saying this. It's a team that represents Washington, D.C. Like, that's where this is. Like, and to me, that's probably part of why. And I mean, this goes to the new stadium and all that they're trying to get funding for. But like, that's why you can't just have a defensive coordinator saying this without some sort of punishment involved there. Like, I mean, you're free to say what you want, but you're not free from the consequences of saying what you want. I took a First Amendment class in college, and I didn't do all that well in it. I do remember that, like, it's just because you say something, it doesn't mean that you're free from the consequences of it. And, sometimes there need to be consequences from when you say something moronic.
And that's the challenge for me, and that's what I continue to wrestle with. What are the fair consequences to Jack Del Rio? Is it enough that he is publicly humiliated, shamed? Not that he cares. He probably wears it as a badge of honor that guys like us are saying what we say.
It depends on, well, maybe. I mean, it depends on how much you want to say that he's being shamed, right? I mean, there are plenty of people who agree with him.
I agree with you that as I read through the statement, it struck me as something that felt more like a precursor to firing him and not a precursor to fining him, that's how strongly it was worded. And it really left me wondering over the weekend whether this is the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning for Del Rio and the Commanders. And we've got 5-6 weeks until training camp starts. They have their mandatory minicamp this week, and I'm sure they're going to do their best to put it behind them. I don't know that they'll make Jack Del Rio available to talk. He probably won't want to be available to talk, as evidenced by the fact that he deleted his Twitter page. Ron Rivera undoubtedly will speak at some point, maybe multiple times, and he'll have to navigate the questions that will be asked about this, and he may get some tough and pointed questions. Who knows? Who knows? Depends on who's at the press conferences where he speaks. But I don't think it's impossible that a $100,000 fine isn't enough to put out the fire. When you have Hall of Fame safety Ed Reed, who isn't known as a guy who, is tweeting all the time and taking, strong positions publicly, he comes out and he says it's not enough. And the players who play for Jack Del Rio need to stand up and be counted. That's a way that, if those players hear this, and they're going to get asked about it this week. And I thought teams didn't like distractions, right? This is one hell of a distraction that's been created by Jack Del Rio, because I suspect that every player is going to be asked about it this week. Will they feel more emboldened to say what they think? Because I think last week, Jonathan Allen, his comments, he kind of said what he had to say, because they're trying not to make this a big distraction and ordeal and problem in the locker room. Ed Reed's comments may prompt some of those players who maybe hadn't even paid attention to it. I think that was part of it. I think maybe some of the players are caught up in their lives and they don't understand. Jack Del Rio said something. What did he say? Well, wait a minute. Somebody has to explain this to me because I'm really not paying attention to it. I feel that way all the time with current events. Like, what's going on here? I feel like I'm 5 news cycles behind wherever the news currently is. Maybe some of these guys had a chance over the weekend to read about it and think about it and talk about it and realize we should be upset about what this guy said.
Maybe. I mean, I certainly, if this is something that is something that you care about and you are a team leader on Washington, then yeah, it's something that you can make, I don't want to say a stink about, but like you can make it a bigger deal than it already has been. But I mean, you wrote something last week about Del Rio, and I retweeted it and was like, we talk about players being distractions all the time. I think you're absolutely right on that track. Right? I mean, we do. We say that, you don't want to be a distraction if you're a player. So why don't we have that same standard for coaches? And I mean, look, this defense last year was not all that great. They were like 22nd in yards allowed. I think, I have it right here. 22nd in yards allowed, 25th in points allowed in 2021. Right? They were very, very, very good the year before. Like, we have to say that. And
the head coach is a defensive guy. The head coach is a defensive guy too, so it's not like they would miss Jack Del Rio. This isn't Bill Belichick, prime defensive coordinator, who would be asked to move on. But you're right.
I was gonna say Bum Phillips or Buddy Ryan. We like whichever defensive guru you want to talk about. I don't think that's what we're talking about right here with Jack Del Rio.
And this is a point I made on Friday. Teams constantly make decisions that are in the best interest of the organization when they tell the guys at the bottom of the roster, sorry, but we're going to sign somebody else. They're going to have 90 guys going to camp. They're going to have 53 who make it to the active roster. And, yeah, they'll have more on the practice squad, but still plenty of guys are going to be asked to pack up their things and leave. Best interest of the team. We got to keep the best players. And this is where, we hear from time to time under the personal conduct policy that non-players are held to a higher standard. I mean, let's think about this.
Are they?
From the standpoint of distractions. No, they say they are, but they aren't. From the standpoint of distractions, okay? Jack Del Rio is a 2-time former head coach. Coached the Jaguars. Did a pretty good job with the Jaguars. ultimately was fired, resurfaced as head coach of the Raiders. Got treated poorly there, I believe, by the whole John Gruden inside deal that was set up while Jack Del Rio was still the coach. I went to bat for Jack Del Rio. I thought he got screwed by Mark Davis and John Gruden. I thought that was shameful. Oh, and by the way, his agent at the time was also representing John Gruden, which made it even worse, frankly. But from the standpoint of understanding how distractions can undermine a team, how distractions can affect a team, he never should have gone there. He should never be doing anything, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's at a press conference, that potentially becomes a distraction. He should be held to the standard of understanding and having the foresight as to how something can become a distraction. He allowed himself to become a distraction. See, I think what happened on Friday was the classic Mike Ehrmantraut Breaking Bad half measure. They should have just fired him. If this is going to be a problem for the team, smacking him down with a $100,000 fine and telling him he's going to delete his Twitter account late on Saturday night when no one is paying attention, that's not enough. If this is enough that it requires you to do anything, I think it requires you to do everything and just say, this relationship is fractured beyond repair. It's not our fault. It's your fault. And we just need to go our separate ways.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.